if you're talking about personal mistakes on their path, then the answer, I think, for Jews, for Protestant Christians, for Catholics, for Sunnis, and for Shia would unanimously be the same, and that is that the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran definitely points out, even if some people are ignorant and they don't realize this, it does point out and it does state, those books do state that the prophets and the messengers, the divinely appointed priests, judges, and kings do commit mistakes. Thanks for joining me, Tiffany.
Thank you so much for having me back.
So today we're going to talk about the idea of infallibility and its role in religion. Okay. And in particular, the three major Western religions, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Okay.
Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all three of them, they have this belief that God sends forward divinely appointed people.
Yeah.
In Islam, they consider these divinely appointed people to be called prophets or messengers. Mm-hmm. In Judaism, they don't have this title, messengers, that they use. But they have a variety of roles in which people that were sent by God would play, and all of them are messengers from God. Mm-hmm. And that would be either you were a prophet, like in the case of Moses, right? Or you were a priest, like in the case of Aaron, or you were a divinely appointed king, like in the place of David. And what was the last one?
A judge.
A judge, like in the case of Joshua, mm-hmm. son of Nun, right? Mm-hmm. So all of these four roles, these people in Judaism, they're believed to have a certain degree of infallibility. The people have to listen to them. Why? Because they're divinely enforced by God. These people in Judaism cannot lead a person astray.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is the basic understanding of infallibility that the Jews have, is that these people, you have to follow them. They cannot lead you astray, but it doesn't mean that they cannot make mistakes. And in fact, we find in the Torah that it highlights the mistakes of the prophets and the messengers, the judges and the kings and the priests, that were divinely appointed by God. But these mistakes that they make are not mistakes that take people out of guidance and into misguidance.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Now, we have in Christianity the same idea, because the Christians, they believe in the New Testament, but their Bible consists of Old Testament and New Testament, which is basically the Torah and a bunch of the Jewish books that belong to the Hebrew prophets and messengers, in addition to the works, the Gospels, which narrate the story of Jesus Christ on the tongue of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, yes. as well as the book of Revelation, and then a whole bunch of letters and writings by Paul, the false prophet.
Yes.
And in Christianity, there's Protestant Christianity, right, with all of its sects, and then you have Catholicism.
Yes.
And both of them believe in the infallibility of the prophets and the messengers in the same way that the Jews do.
Yep.
Except that in Catholicism, they believe that there's always a divinely appointed representative of God in every day and age.
Yes.
Right? And that there's these divinely appointed leaders that come after Jesus. That Jesus, he didn't just leave his church open for interpretation. And you being a Christian, a former Christian and Catholic, I want you to explain a little bit for the viewer the difference between the Protestant Christians and the Catholic Christians when it comes to this idea of infallibility and succession.
Sure, yeah. So in the Bible, Jesus appoints Simon Peter, and he says, "You are my rock upon which I will build my church, and everything that you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and everything that you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." And he gives him this authority, which is basically that Peter was the successor of Jesus. He appoints him and says that the authority that he has to lead and to lead on behalf of God, like not that he's inventing rulings, but that he's taking the rulings from God. He's representing God on earth. He's the divinely appointed leader and ruler. This began with Simon Peter after Jesus, and the Catholics believe that there was always a successor after that, leading up until today with the current Pope that we have today. So the Pope is meant to be the successor of God on earth, and the Pope has God's authority to rule. And his rulership and his rulings and everything that he says is actually meant to be coming from God. So this is the concept of papal infallibility. It's believed that he has this divine ability to lead people.
And so the Baptists and the Methodists,
they don't take that at all.
They don't take that. They don't, but they believe that the divine sending of messengers ends in the time of Jesus and the 12 apostles, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's believed, it's commonly believed that they have with them the Holy Spirit and they don't need a leader from God. So they reject that concept.
So does that mean that all the Christians become masum or infallible?
In a sense, they have God's Spirit, with them. They believe that God is guiding them individually and personally.
Okay. So that's the majority of Christians, but the Catholics, they follow the divinely appointed leader.
Yes.
We find the exact same thing taking place also in Islam, where we have Sunni Islam, and Sunni Islam has a lot of different schools of thoughts and sects that are associated with it. And we have Shia Islam that also has a whole bunch of sects that are associated with it. Mm-hmm. And in Sunni Islam, it's very much like Protestant Christianity in the sense that they believe in no divinely appointed leader after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the same way that the Protestants believe in no divinely appointed leader after Jesus.
Yeah.
For the Sunnis, it's enough that they have the Quran, and the Quran doesn't make them infallible, but provides them with enough guidance that they don't need anything else after that.
Okay.
And so they believe that Muhammad was the final of the infallibles. And the Sunni Muslims, they believe that the prophets and the messengers were all infallible, and none of them made any mistakes, really.
Okay.
Although they do recognize that the Quran highlights certain personal mistakes that the prophets and the messengers did. And we're going to go over that in a minute.
Okay.
Shia Islam, it breaks down into many sects. You have the Zaydis, you have the Ismailis, you have the Twelver Jafaris. And basically, they believe, just like the Catholics do, that after the Prophet Muhammad, in every day and age, there has to be a divinely appointed guide or successor to the Prophet that would safeguard his religion. And they believe that the 12 Imams who were appointed after the Prophet Muhammad play the same role that the 12 disciples did for Jesus, in the sense that they safeguard his religion, although they're not sent at the same time, but they come as successors to one another.
Okay.
Okay? Okay. And the different sects within Shia Islam, they all believe in this idea of the infallibility of their imams, but they differ on the appointment of certain imams, right? So some of them take certain individuals as imams, and a different line, like the Ismailis, they follow Ismail, son of Ja'far as-Sadiq, while the Twelvers, they follow Musa, son of Ja'far as-Sadiq, right?
Okay.
Okay. Peace be upon them.
It's a cool parallel between the two faiths.
It is.
They have this differentiation between two major groups.
Exactly. So the Shia, they believe also like the Sunnis do and like the Christians do and the Jews, and it seems like everybody's on the same page, that the prophets and the messengers and the people that are appointed by God, they have to be enforced by God to a certain degree, or else it's pointless to follow them.
Yeah.
And they all agree that their mistakes, the mistakes that the prophets and the messengers can do, are mistakes that cannot take people out of guidance and into misguidance, or else it would be pointless.
Yeah.
So there we get the definition and the idea of really, what does infallibility mean? Does infallibility mean that a person cannot make a mistake? And the answer is, well, it depends on what type of mistake you're talking about. If you're talking about a mistake as in breaking a certain, rule of God, or introducing a rule that had nothing to do with God, or causing people to worship false idols, saying that a false god was God, or delivering, verses that have nothing, delivering verses from the Quran that are actually from the devil. The answer is they cannot. They're protected from that because they have with them the Holy Spirit, right?
Yes.
And they have God enforcing them. But if you're talking about personal mistakes on their path, then the answer, I think, for Jews, for Protestant Christians, for Catholics, for Sunnis, and for Shia would unanimously be the same. And that is that the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran definitely points out, even if some people are ignorant and they don't realize this, it does point out, and it does state, those books do state, that the prophets and the messengers, the divinely appointed priests, judges, and kings do commit mistakes, personal mistakes on their path with God. And that's where you get the varying degrees of ranks that the prophets and the messengers ascended to. That's why you have a prophet like Moses, for example, being much better than, say, Aaron, right? Mm-hmm. Or a prophet like Jesus being much better than a prophet like Zechariah or like John the Baptist, right? Mm-hmm. Because the mistakes committed by that prophet were much less, and their devotion and dedication and perfection was much higher.
Yeah. Okay. Right? Yeah.
Okay.
That's an interesting topic, because I think that it's like actually widely misunderstood. And I've heard many people say that it's impossible that a prophet could make a mistake. But I agree with you that I can even think of, some stories where it would seem that it was a mistake, but not the mistake that would lead people astray from God.
Now, the final aspect of infallibility before we continue on our journey would be this differentiation between two types of infallibility that people might think of when they're mentioning the word infallibility. There's earned infallibility, and earned infallibility means that a prophet or messenger or an individual was not born infallible. His nature was not infallible. He came as a normal person, and at a certain point in his life, he's chosen, for the message. And through his dedication, through him being a good believer, receives the Holy Spirit and then becomes infallible. So an example of earned infallibility would be, we'll talk about like very evident examples, right? Okay. So in Christianity, you might have somebody like Simon Peter. So at some point in time, after following Jesus, he is chosen to be Jesus' successor. He's given the Holy Spirit, and he becomes infallible. But that doesn't mean that Catholics believe that Simon Peter was infallible his entire life, do they?
No, they don't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what we mean when we say earned infallibility. And I think that all of the prophets and the messengers and the kings, for the most part, had this type of infallibility. They were normal people who had normal lives, who were not born infallible, but at some point in time, there's a certain moment in the Torah, in the Bible, in the Quran, where they get chosen to be messengers or representatives of God, or moments when the Holy Spirit comes down upon them, and that is the moment where their infallibility begins.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
The other idea of infallibility is this concept of inherent infallibility, that the person is inherently perfect, that he never committed a mistake or a sin. And I think that this concept of inherent infallibility is absent within Judaism. Earned infallibility for Jews applies to all of their prophets and messengers.
Yeah.
They believe that all of them made mistakes, and all of them, before they were chosen, had mistakes or had normal lives, right?
Yeah, yeah. They would all fall into that category.
And the Jews believe that nobody is perfect except for God, right? The Christians, because they believe that Jesus is God, they would say that Jesus had which type of infallibility, Tiffany?
Inherent infallibility for sure. That he was born infallible.
And he never had a mistake in his life. And actually, they say that he was born of a virgin birth.
Exactly.
Right?
That he is the Son of God.
And because he was born of a virgin in Christianity, he does not inherit the original sin of Adam. Right?
Right.
So therefore, like,
sins
and mistakes don't apply to him because he's not polluted by that.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, which is interesting, by the way, but it's a topic for another episode, because they claim that because he didn't have a father, he didn't have sin because he couldn't inherit the sin from Adam. But yet in Christianity, they believe that Eve was the original sinner, right? Not Adam.
Yeah.
I mean, Adam was too, but Eve was kind of, she's the first one who ate from the tree. And so we'll discuss in the future aspect about sin. Can it come down? Does it come down through the womb or through the seed, or how does this take place? Okay. And then we have the idea in Islam of inherent infallibility. And I think that for Sunnis and for Shia, they both have narrations which regard the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as being inherently infallible. They believe that the Prophet Muhammad was always protected and safeguarded from ever making a mistake. Yeah. And history, the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, and also the Sunni narrations demonstrate that. And there's one narration which speaks about how the Prophet, before Islam, he was invited to go to a party, and there was a lot of alcohol and other things that were going on there. And God causes him to fall asleep, so that he doesn't partake or participate in this matter. So you find that the Prophet's always been kind of protected from that. And there's, and he's always been known as the righteous one. He's always been known as the trustworthy one. He's always been known to be extremely honest and to have these traits of perfection from the time that he was a little boy all the way until adulthood and during the rest of the course of his life. Okay? Okay. All right. So Jews, they believe in earned infallibility. Christians, they do too. So do Muslims. But for Christians, Jesus has inherent infallibility, and for Muslims, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has inherent infallibility.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
For Shia Muslims, though, the inherent infallibility extends and it includes not just Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it also includes the 14 infallibles, the rest of the 14 infallibles. And for them, that would be all those that they believe the verse of God applies to in Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 33. Verily, God only wishes to remove all impurities from you, O Ahlul Bayt, O people of the house, and to purify you a thorough purification. And so they take this verse to prove that God, he washed away every sin and every mistake, not just from Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but from his daughter Fatima, and his grandsons Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein, and his successor Imam Ali alayhi salam. So those are the people of the house, in addition to the 9 imams that come from the lineage of Al-Hussein, starting with Imam Zain al-Abidin and ending with Imam al-Mahdi. That these 14 infallibles are inherently without sin and without mistake, and it's just their nature.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
So people have struggled with this idea, and scholars have talked about this idea of infallibility and the sending or choosing of prophets and messengers, and God's justice, right? Like, so in simple terms, if God is just, why is he choosing these particular people to bestow upon them the Holy Spirit? Why didn't he choose me instead? Okay? If God is just, why didn't he give everybody the chance to hear his commands or hear his voice? Why is it that these prophets and messengers are not in a test like the rest of us, right? They hear God's voice, they see the angels, believing for them should not be difficult, as to where like we have to trust in their words. This is extremely difficult, right? And it seems like the believer gets the shorter end of the stick. So is this true or is this not true? And we have in the narrations of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, it states that basically in a world beforehand, in the Adam world, God tested all of the souls, and he sets this great fire, and all of the souls of the prophets and the messengers and the people are commanded to go into the fire. And the ones that respond, there was 3 groups of people: a group of people that jumped in the fire, a group of people that didn't jump in the fire, and a group of people that were hesitant and then they jumped in the fire. Okay. So, so the narration states that the first ones that jumped without fear or hesitation into the fire were the prophets and the messengers and the righteous ones, right? And the ones that hesitated, or the rest of the believers, and the people that didn't go in, are the ones that ended up being non-believers in this world. Another narration states that God basically, before sending people down in human form, he has this veil. And from behind the veil, Tiffany, he yells out, or he shouts out, "Am I not your Lord?" Right? And so the first ones that prostrate and say, "Yes, you are Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his household." Followed by the prophets and the messengers, right? So one would prostrate, and then the other, and then the other, and then the other. And that was the ranks of the prophets and the messengers. Those who prostrated the fastest versus those who hesitated a little bit, versus the believers who hesitated a lot, versus the non-believers who didn't. And that's what determined the ranks and who was sent as a prophet messenger in this world. Interesting. It's a reflection of what happened in the spiritual realm. And then we also have people that state, and it is true as well, that also in this world, the prophets and the messengers were chosen because they were the best of the people. They were the most dedicated, the most loyal, the most sincere. The best of the believers end up being chosen as prophets and messengers. And so you find in religion this kind of ranking system that's taking place. So you have believers, and they're better than non-believers. And so it's non-believers, believers, and then there's prophets, right? And then there's the best of prophets, which are ulil azm prophets, or prophets that came with a new jurisprudence or a new covenant, as we spoke about in the last episode. And then and those ones that reach this rank of being prophets of covenants, they basically had a higher form of infallibility. And that higher form of infallibility in the Quran, they would call it imamat, right? Because Abraham, after he was chosen to be a prophet and a messenger, he ended up being chosen for imamat, right? And even within prophethood, before we get to that rank of that, you have prophets that were receiving prophecies and then prophets that were actually sent to nations as messengers. So you have 124,000 prophets, and out of those 124,000 prophets, you have 313 that were sent as messengers, specifically to nations, to people. These ones, they could prophesy, but they weren't in task. They didn't have that task to go to a particular nation, as to where the best of those prophets that received the guidance from God, they were actually sent forward with a task to face a nation. Okay. And so it had to be those prophets with the best of faith, the best of certitude, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's easy to receive a prophecy from God in a dream.
Yeah, you believe in yourself. You know it to be true. Yeah.
But it becomes much harder if you actually have to go and proclaim it and convince other people and hear the other people denying. So the 313 prophets that became messengers, they had a lot more faith and they were much better and had a higher degree of infallibility that they earned through their faith than the other 124,000 prophets. And the 124,000 prophets, they had earned infallibility as to where the normal believers did not have it. And the covenant prophets, they had an even greater form of infallibility than those 313 messengers, because now they're receiving prophecies, they're having to face nations, and at the same time, they have to come with a message that's completely new than the message that came before them.
Yeah, and right? It's an extremely difficult job, as we talked about it before, the stuff that they had to face in convincing the people that this is God's religion, and God's religion has changed, and there's a new covenant. It's much harder than having to just face people based on the jurisprudence and the traditions of the messengers who've come before. People are more inclined to believe that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, and so now for Shia Islam, this rank of imamat that the covenant prophets have, this rank of imamat is the same type of imamat. Actually, the 14 infallibles would have a greater form of imamat, because the imamat then of the covenant prophets that are Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, right?
Yes.
Those four, they have earned infallibility in the Islamic Shia Islam.
Okay.
As to where Muhammad and the imams, his successors, they have inherent infallibility. So that is the only difference between Muhammad and his successors from those four covenant prophets, basically Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, that they're all kind of in the same rank, except that their nature, Muhammad and his family's nature, is infallible versus them.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.